Okay, well, thank you guys and welcome to the Winter Organic Green webinar series. I'm really glad that you're here and grateful that you're taking some time this evening to join us in this space. My name is Katie Bishop. I am the Organic Grain Mentorship Coordinator with the Land Connection. And I'm also an organic farmer at Prairie Earth Farm here in Atlanta, Illinois, where we raise organic grain and bedding plants. We used to grain and produce and livestock, and then we got a little simpler, and now we grow grain and bedding plants. It really is just a gift to bring Gary here with us and gather tonight. So thank you for being here today. So before I turn it over to Gary, I just want to share a little bit about the Land Connection. Our work is really centered on helping farmers and communities thrive for the long term. And we often talk about this through these three connected ideas of healthy farms, healthy food, and healthy communities. And while my work is to focus on organic grain and our mentorship program, my colleagues support all different types of farmers in restorative ways of growing, whether that's through training programs like these types of webinars, or scholarship programs for farmers, or field days. We just wrapped up our annual organic grain conference. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold too. And then we also partner with Sam Oswald Tilton to host the Midwest Mechanical Weed Control Field Day, which I believe this year is in Michigan, if any of you folks are close. We also do a lot of work with food access, and we have a farmers market in Champaign, Illinois. And then finally, our Illinois Farm Link team works really hard to pair landowners with farmers to maintain those family farms and keep our rural communities really vibrant. So by attending this webinar, you are supporting this great work. So thank you for that. Okay, now it's time for me to introduce the wonderful Gary. Gary, if you don't know, is a long-time farmer and educator and oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. This is why Gary is talking and I am not. I might just let Gary introduce himself so you guys don't have to hear me cough. Gary, would that work?
That'll work fine.
I think you could probably do it way, way better. I do want to say, Gary has said that you're more than welcome to ask questions as they come up. So you can put it in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute or raise your hand feature. We can also save him to the end too, but he is willing to just impromptu answer questions while they're fresh. All right, Gary, I'm going to get your presentation up here if you want to go ahead and start introducing yourself.
All right. Yes. I've been probably known in the business of biological organic agriculture longer than anyone else. I've been at it for 40 some years. I used to teach at a tech school. I'm a dairy nutritionist, and I don't imagine there's any dairy people on this webinar, just because if they are dairy farmers, they're probably milking cows. But I got into soils to create better feed for dairy cows. I got introduced to organics in the 1970s, actually, when I was doing my graduate work in Hawaii, and feeding pineapple hay to cows caused abortions and all kinds of problems. And I said, but people are eating pineapples. It was the insecticides on the pineapple. So that got me into organic. And then I got into soils. I'm self-taught in soils. I'm really a dairy nutritionist, but cows and soils are very similar. And so I'm self-taught. And so I taught for numbers of years, and I got introduced to Brookside Laboratory Farms and got introduced to soils, and I became a Brookside consultant. But then I couldn't find the fertilizers and materials I wanted, so I quit that and came back into Wisconsin. I was in Minnesota and started Midwestern BioAg with a few other folks, and really it was about providing the minerals and nutrition that people needed back then. You couldn't get those things in the organic movement. I knew a lot of the farmers. I'm a dairy guy, and so my business was all working with dairy farms. And in fact, I would have a hard time today. When I started, there were 30,000 dairy farms in the state of Wisconsin, and now we're getting it down to about 5,000 farms. So the ones that left the business were my customers. When Organic Valley started the organic milk thing, I told them it was a dumb idea. I said, a bunch of hippies in the hollow don't even drink milk. Who are you going to sell your milk to? But I guess I was wrong on that one. So, but anyway, I got so the dairy farm and the people that got in it were passionate about their cows and their land. I'm one of those guys that I get a little bothered by the people that are jumping in just to make extra money. I'm not saying we shouldn't make a living at farming, but if that's your only focus and you don't have the responsibility, I see that as a problem. So I've been at it a long time. I sold Midwestern Bioegg. I now work with a composting guy in the state of Wisconsin. We're making designer compost, adding minerals to compost in Wisconsin. And I still travel all over the countryside. And it's pretty hard for me to quit. I've been ingrained in it for such a long time. I'm down in Buffalo, Missouri. I did an all-day seminar for a bunch of Amish and Mennonite farmers and a lot of organic ones down here at Buffalo with Ozark Organics. And so that's where I was today. And I'm sitting in a motel room tonight. So, all right, let me go to the next one. So then you can see I've written several books. I talk fairly fast. I got a reputation for that. And so I try to get all my words down in the books. That last picture you showed was my last book, came out about 6-7 years ago. I am working on another one, the biological farming. That one's 500 and some pages. That's my most complete, covering everything. Advancing biological farming is probably the one that sells the most. And that was written a few years before that. And that one's really more practical, more farmer friendly. And it's the one the Amish and this group of people today, they really like that one. So I think I start out then saying, what are your rights and responsibilities? Because if I look at this thing out here, I said the consumer is willing to pay more for the organic, and you ought to be responsible for your customer. And so I'm really big on that. They have the right to get what they're paying for. The picture you are looking at is actually soils on our farm. We've got a very unique farming system. We no longer have dairy cows. We're like a lot of others. Couldn't find help and just got burned out with it all. And so we are cash croppers today. Well, my daughter raises custom raised calves, but we have a 1-year soil building and 1-year corn program. And it's hard to get people to follow it, but it's a very successful farming system for us. We farmed, we were 1,500 acres. We're the only farm getting smaller. We're down to about 1,200, but half of it's corn and half of it's soil building. My son farms alone with just a little part-time help on his 1,200 acres, and we're scattered in a 45-mile circle. And so the cover crops and what we've done to the soil, what you're looking at is what I like to see in soil. And I always tell people, do I need to test that to see if it's healthy, or can you see? If you look at that, you can see these beautiful, wonderful soils, and we're quite proud of those things. And we built up a lot of resilience, and our soils keep getting better and better every year. We've been at this about 10 years now. So, all right, next one. So where do you start? And if you want to clip up the next few pictures, see, I want to start out with knowledge. So where's knowledge? You see, this here, the picture you're looking at is in southwestern Wisconsin. That's Taliesin, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. We've been farming that for 25 years. A little interesting side note on it. I met with the guy that's got bees on the farm. And see, we're so isolated there that the closest conventional land is probably 3 to 5 miles away. It's all organic or along the river, and it's all trees and woods. The bees on this farm have the least amount of health problems. The bees on this farm produce the most honey, and they're the fattest of any ones of his bees. Now, I don't know how you tell if a bee is skinny or fat. I haven't figured that out yet. But anyway, that's Frank Lloyd Wright's farm. So what kind of knowledge? I think you have to understand it's a system. Organic farming is not really a system. You can be certified organic by not doing. And I'll mention that a little while. If I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do the other, I must be organic. So knowledge, what kind of knowledge? I think you got to understand your soils. You got to understand the total. You got to put a whole different hat on your head if you've been conventional farming and you want to look at organic, because you're not going to buy all this. It's not about substituting inputs. It's about a farming system that's really different. It's about constantly growing cover crops. It's about get your minerals in a carbon biological cycle, extracting more minerals from the soil, which is probably the thing behind regenerative. So next one. So you got to remove some negatives. And whatever that might be. So everybody says, there for a while, tillage was getting really beat up really bad. Oh, you can't do any tillage, you can't do anything. But I think Rodale and a few other groups out here are now saying that you organic farmers that are doing a good job and you're tilling once in a while, I'm not saying you can plow, dig, and disc every year, are building more organic matter than the guys that are no-till. If you leave everything lay up on top, what gives you healthy soil? Now, there's some successful at it, but there's a lot of them are really failing because it's got its issues. So what are your negatives on your farm? Probably way too much conventional manure, a lack of soil mineral balance, a lack of really understanding this thing, try to going after high return crops all the time, maybe too much corn and beans in your rotation. Might be some negatives. And I think every farmer, I don't care where you are and who you are, conventional organic or whatever, calcium, sulfur, and boron are really some of the things I accidentally stumbled on over the years that I like putting on soluble calcium. Well, what does that mean? That means we actually like making organic cal. I did at BioEgg when I ran it. And we took a regular powdered fine gypsum and high calcium lime source and added humates. If your soil has got a low pH, adding lime, you get available calcium. What if your pHs are 7 and above? And I'm not so hung up on what your pH ought to be because I want your minerals in a carbon biological cycle. And we just aren't getting enough sulfur, and we're very deficient on boron. Boron's kind of the flavor of the month for everybody now. Everybody's really accidentally, some farmers put on much heavier doses. And so people are really saying, have we been doing enough boron? And they've been driving their boron levels. It's sugar translocation. It's mineral uptake, it's calcium uptake, and it's pollination. So it has a lot of major functions within the plant is boron. Next one. And so then the other thing I use the balanced fertilizers. I think, instead of just picking out conventional does NPK. Well, I think but one thing nice about the organic, if you're using a rock phosphate or using a manure source or using some different kinds of materials, potassium sulfate, and generally you're picking up other minerals with it. I think, I'm not opposed to having manures on farms. It's just hard. I'm not saying conventional manures doesn't have some issues. It probably should be composted. And the last one I have up there is carbon and biology. Get your minerals in the carbon biological cycle. So if you look at that base, where do you start? If you just get those things on a piece of paper and say, how am I doing? Do I understand it well enough? Have I removed negatives? Have I provided enough calcium, sulfur, and boron? Am I using enough? Am I missing some minerals out here? If you have any issues, if like disease or insects, or somebody eating up your crops, or something going wrong out here, way too many weeds, and you better take a look at what the soil's like, and if I'm missing minerals or I'm missing the soil structure thing, and where are my minerals? Dumping on rock phosphate on a high pH dead soil is probably not going to do you much, but why not put humates with that phosphate? Why not put that phosphate in a compost system if you need more phosphorus? Next one. So what are the issues with organic? Well, fertility. It's not that we can't have high fertility. It's the fact that the fertility out here needs to come from a different avenue than buying soluble nutrients. And so, and everybody's fighting the nitrogen. I'm down here at this meeting today. These guys are putting on 4 tons of turkey manure and another 2 tons of chicken manure. One guy's putting on 12 tons of poultry manure on his elderberries to try to all going after nitrogen. And see, that's not sustainable, and it's not really what the consumer wants their food to have in it. So that's always an issue. But see, nitrogen's the only one you can grow. Our soil building here, we provide 400 units of nitrogen from our cover crops onto our corn crop every other year. So the nitrogen I can grow. I can pull it out of the atmosphere. That's the only mineral I can grow. The rest I either have to provide or extract from stuff that's already in the soil. Other issues are plant health if we don't get that trace minerals and things right. A big one is weed control. People are really always struggling with weeds. I'm down there in Illinois doing a meeting, and a very big group of organic farmers. And of course, they're all complaining about weed control, but they're all putting on 2 to 4 tons of poultry manure, raw poultry manure from conventional operations. And I said, you're fertilizing the weeds you have. I said, either compost that manure, or I said, you're doing it for the nitrogen. I said, you're not on a sustainable program. So I really talk about weed control. As your weed seeds are really little, and they come from harder, tighter soil. If you got a loose, crumbly soil, like I showed you the pictures that are on our farm, it's very difficult for those weeds to get going. Now, yes, we have a few giant ragweed, and yes, we have some weeds, but we've done a lot better on that. And the other thing with organic, everybody's, oh, you guys are making $10 a bushel on corn. Look at all the money you make. We quit growing soybeans because they only increase your weed seed bank. I grew enough soybeans in my life. We're not doing that anymore. We're corn growers and soil builders. So you're off years. You can't grow corn beans, and call it organic. See, back in the old days, before there were the standards haven't helped us in a lot of ways. You could only grow row crops 2 out of 5 years. You had to grow other crops that weren't row crops. So you could say wheat's not a row crop, but you had to grow something 3 out of the 5 years that was not a row crop. So now those off years, and people are trying to get rid of those off years. If you're going to constantly work your soil that hard and grow the high return crops every year, you better figure out how to keep your soil healthy and productive. So the off years are an issue with organic that a lot of people don't want to have a year where they don't make any money. I don't mind that at all. If everybody followed our system of 1 year soil building and 1 year production, we'd really be short of crops and we'd all get paid a lot more. I tell the conventional farmers that all the time. They don't like to hear it. They want their government check, of course. Next one. So, and you can hit that again. All right. So this here is something from John Kemp, and a lot of you know John. He was one of my consultants. There's about a half a dozen people in my lifetime, and some of you older folks have been around a while. Jerry Benetti was always a really good friend of mine. They got genius minds. Jerry Benetti, John Kemp, Dan Kittredge, Alan Philo. These young guys, they got an unbelievable wealth of knowledge, and John is certainly one of those. And this is from Advancing Eco-Ag. And I know John really well, and he does more into the vegetable world, and I'm more I like to work with crops that don't make you a lot of money because I like to work harder for my money. But anyway, healthy plants resist disease and insect. I was on a farm in Wisconsin, a large dairy farm. They went out of business and sold it to a conventional farm that milks 2,000 cows. So the guys that bought it were going to, because they couldn't get any more land, and they were going to switch it to conventional. And then they saw the price of organic milk. They could get a 3-year contract for over $40 a hundred for milk isn't such big demand. So they were going to go, they said, we'll keep it organic. Now, the dad on this operation, he's about as paranoid about weeds on the farm as my wife is about spiders. If there's a spider in our house, I have to move to a new house. And so, oh my gosh, he can't stand weeds. So I said, a few weeds are plants, they're a cover crop, they're a variety plant you don't have to buy. And so he said to me, well, what do you do about disease and insects on your alfalfa? He said, we spray every crop of alfalfa, every cutting, every year. And I said, well, we've been at this for 25 years. I said, I've never seen a disease or insect economic loss on our farm. I've never seen it where it was even a problem. He rolled his eyes like he thought I wasn't telling the truth. Now, he could buy. So someone said, oh, we have an organic insecticide he could spray. If you're going down that route, I think you're missing the value of organic. So I think healthy plants do have an immune system. That's what nutrient-dense foods, once we get that figured out, that plants actually have their own immune system and they can build up all those plant protective compounds that need to be in the food we eat. So when we eat that food, then we get those plant protective compounds that help protect us. And next one here on mineral nutrition supports plant immunity. And of course, minerals and trace minerals and things are involved in developing a strong immunity both in plants and us. And microbial metabolites are a more efficient source of nutrition. In other words, dead bodies of bugs, minerals in the biology, the byproducts from mineral nutrition are really a much better source of nutrition than dumping on a fertilizer of some kind. And then this next one, if you once ever figure out what quality is, and you say, I'm going to be farming for quality. I want to have quality. Quality drives yields. So you're not going after yield. In fact, there's a large farm in Michigan I've worked with for years. He's got the highest quality potatoes for Frito-Lays. And he said, when we switched from trying to grow potatoes and our focus became soil health, our potatoes sure started doing better. He's the #1 potato grower for Frito-Lays on quality. And so they grew cover crops, they do compost, they do all these kind of things to get their soil healthy, and then they make their living doing potatoes. But they used to have potatoes once every 4 years. Now they're once every other year or every third year. And then healthy plants create healthy soil. John says, now I do that the opposite. I say healthy soil creates healthy plants. Now, if you got a healthy plant, how are you going to get it without healthy soil? I suppose you got to spoon feed it a lot of material. So him and I have a little disagreement on that, but I'm sure to get a healthy plant, it needs to come out of healthy soil, doesn't it? Next one. So organic is not doing. That's a picture on our farm out here from years ago already. And it's the system of not doing. So you can be certified organic. It didn't do this. It didn't do that. It didn't do this. And to me, that's a mistake. And I would have a little different take on it if I could write the rules. Next one. So I believe in my career, we got it mostly figured out. And this got me in trouble. If you're a scientist and a researcher and you make your living trying to figure this thing out and we already know it all, I'm probably infringing upon your knowledge territory. We understand the minerals. We know there's more than 20 minerals known to grow a crop. It's not just N, P, and K. We understand that there's a ratio between those minerals. We understand that you have to have a certain sufficiency level in your soils. I'm still a believer in taking the old style soil test and saying, if I'm short of minerals, I want to add them. So we know a lot about minerals. We know their relationships and their ratios, and we see their value on making plants healthy. We also understand biology. They need to have a place to live. They need to have a blanket over their head. They need to be fed well. They need to have air and they have water. You got certain things to do if you're going to have biology flourish. And it took me a long time to learn this, but the plants determine the biology. It's not the other way around. So if a plant wants more phosphorus, it might feed the mycorrhizae. If it wants more nitrogen, it might put more nodules like on your soybeans. And that's why if you go into a low nutrient situation, and that's why if you grow a more mature cover crop before you plant your soybeans, not only you're going to cut down on weed pressure, but you're going to get a better nodulation on your soybeans. And so the more diversity of plants, the more diversity of soil life you have in your soil, the less issues you're going to have on your farm. And then we've got the tools and knowledge for proper tillage. It's not about, I always say tillage is a thoughtful disturbance of the soil. And so tillage is really about, I'm a real believer in shallow incorporating residues and running a deep ripper because I got to get water to soak in if it's necessary. Now, the only thing we run high-speed disc and we do shallow incorporating residues. We have an inline ripper. We have not used it in 5 years. I'm trying to grow more sweet clover with big taproots. We're trying to do more with what we do onto the soil as compared to putting iron into the ground. So I think we understand all of those things out here. I think what the no-till guy taught you is you can't plow, dig, and disc every year. That does not build the healthy soils. The strip, I'm a real believer in strip till. I'm trying to develop and been working on it for way too long, and we don't have time to get it done. I actually got a row more. I wanted to grow in our clover. I wanted to grow a strip till. So I spoke at the strip till conference last year. So see, strip till people taught us you get a loose, put a flower pot under every plant, get a loose, nice, loose, crumbly ground, and then double your root system. Cut your water and fertilizer in half, and then leave middle zone alone. You can do everything you want to the top couple inches, but once you get that middle section from 3-4 inches down into a foot full of roots and earthworm channels, if you tear that back up, you have to start all over. So the previous crop when that died dead and gone, so all those little root channels ought to be there for the crop that you plant to follow them. So I think we understand this whole tillage thing a lot better. We understand what we're trying to achieve. And it says, I always, this destroys soils, and I got a little bit more on tillage later, but and they said a plow really does a lot of damage. Well, it depends on how they're used out here, but working bare ground is how you destroy soils. If you get a beautiful big cover crop and you're cutting through roots and plowing it, or you're running a disc, you never take a disc on bare ground. That's how you destroy soils, working bare soils. Next one. So I won't spend time going through these. I have done these a lot of times out here. And that is the fact that my rules, the biological farming. So I wrote these back in the 90s. It's the only farming system. Like, there's no rules to regenerative ag. What are the rules to regenerative ag? There's certainly a lot of disagreement. Originally, I was bothered by that. I thought, come on, it's going to be, this guy says, oh, you got to have no-till. And this guy says, I got to have livestock. Well, I'm sorry, everybody's not going to have livestock, and it's not suited to go for no-till for everybody. And so there are no rules to regenerative. What I like about regenerative is everybody recognizes it's broken. Why would you have to regenerate if everything was working fine? There must be a problem. So if you say, I'm going to regenerate something, you just admitted it's broke. So I like that part. So now what you're going to regenerate is probably different for every farm. But every farmer's got a constraint or some kind of limiting factor. My rules to biological farming really deal with 3 areas. They deal with the chemistry. I want to take a soil test. I want to measure more than NPK. I want to then I divided 2 things out in your soil that makes life a lot simpler, because one time years ago, a farmer said, boy, your fertilizer is expensive. And I said, well, that's because half of it's going to fix your soil. If your soil was mineralized and fixed, I wouldn't need to use that half. I could cut your fertilizer in half. So we hardly put any inputs on our farm anymore, but we have remineralized that land. So I don't want to put salts and ammonias in there and you got to throw manure in that category. I want to use a balance of nutrients. I want to separate out soil correction from crop fertilizer. So if you got to spend, I work with the Savannah Institute in Spring Green, we might spend $500 to $700 an acre remineralizing the soil before they plant their trees, hazelnuts, chestnuts, or currants, whatever they might be, because you're never going to get another chance to put something back into that soil. So when we transition land, the first 2 years in transitioning before it's certified organic, we only soil build, cover crops, compost, manure. We just remineralize that land. So that's soil correction. But then once it's corrected, what nutrients do I need to use? And that depends on what kind of crops you're growing. On our farm with all our cover crops, the only inputs we have is sulfur and boron. But so I want my minerals added with carbon, whether I put them in the compost pile, whether I add humates to them, whether I got them in a green plant. I don't want to add those minerals by themselves. And then the other thing out here, of course, we're organic. You don't need to worry about herbicides, pesticides, but maybe nitrogen. Putting on a lot of chicken manure because you're chasing nitrogen might be a mistake. I think you can grow in nitrogen. I think it is a mistake. And then you got to have a lot of plant diversity. And you have got to be feeding that soil life. And I like, and see, on dairy farms years ago, one of the things that was really successful with livestock, tighten your rotation. Don't leave a field in hay for 5 years because you're sucking all the minerals and all the organic matter off. How about 2 years and then turn it into corn? So the tighter rotations, I think, really help your crops, your economics, and your soils. And then I want to use my tillers to control the decay of residues and to manage air and water. And so I like my zone tillers, we try to get an organic system for that. I think once we'll get a strip till, a zone till system for organic, I think that'll help a lot of people. And we want to make sure that we got drainage going on our soil. And the last one is I got to feed my soil life. They need to be fed, and they need a source of calcium that's available. So next one. So biological farming is doing everything you can to get your soils healthy and mineralized. If I want to put it in just a few words, what that might be, you better get minerals out there. You better feed your soil life. You better make sure this water is not standing on your ground and it's soaking in. So anything you can do in your mind, what am I going to regenerate? What am I doing? I'm doing everything I can to get my soils healthy and mineralized within the budget I have. I got to realize that we started out, my son didn't have a lot of money to spend on fixing it. Now we just fix it. But it wasn't like that in the beginning. So next one. So if I had it to do all over again, I would change. I wouldn't call it biological farming. I think this is your focus. And so I didn't really, you hear these words and people say soil health. It's about human health. You're healthy. What does that mean? Well, that means I'm functioning without taking a lot of drugs. Well, that's me, but that doesn't mean that's everybody. So soil health is the capacity to function without intervention. I should not have to intervene with insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, any kind of added nitrogen. I should be able to have, my soil should be healthy enough to take care of it. And soil fertility is the exchange of nutrients. And that's what's really clobbering the regenerative world on conventional farming right now. So soil fertility is the maximum level of nutrients that are exchangeable for the crop. Not because you dump them on, like dumping rock phosphate on the soil. Are you sure the plant's getting it? How about putting a soluble nutrient out there? How much is tying up? How much is leaching? Are you really getting it? So if you put your whole focus on soil health and soil fertility, am I getting the best use out of the stuff I'm buying? And if my soil is healthy, and are they functioning? And do they have a lot of capacity in here? Am I growing healthy plants with big, beautiful root systems? I think that should be your focus. And that's what I should have named my books way back in the beginning, but I didn't really understand this until recently. Next one. So this is a chart that I shared. I got this purple cow there in Wisconsin from Steve, gave it to me. And then I was up in Canada. I've been going to Canada a lot. If our government doesn't want it, doesn't mean I can't go. But anyway, sorry, I'll stay out of politics. But anyway, so this is actually, I said to Steve, I said, I had a professor at my meeting up in Canada, and he kind of stood up and kind of attacked me and said, "Where'd you get that? That's a bunch of BS." I sent him all the research on this thing. He never responded back. So it must be pretty legit. It came from University Scientific Research. This is since the 1990s. Our nutrient use efficiency has dropped dramatically. Now, that's not on your farm. This is in the world of farming. So nitrogen is only 30 to 70% usable. And that's why you, as an organic farmer, everybody says, oh, we know it takes 1.1 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. How many of you organic farmers are growing corn are using 1.1 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn? But if only 30 to 70% of what I put on is usable, how much nitrogen do I actually need? And I got nitrogen hanging over every acre and gobs of it. Phosphorus, 5 to 30%. See, that's why I said to farm, I'd like to take over if I was going to go organic. Go to the farm that the guy had a lot of manure and bought a lot of fertilizer and went broke doing it. Now you've got a reserve to draw from. You're going to take an old rundown CRP land and think you're going to extract minerals. Probably not, but they dumped all those minerals on that they couldn't tap into. Potassium, 30 to 60%. The trace metals from 0 to 70% usable. So this is what regenerative is all about. How do I get more use out of those minerals? How do I get those minerals into a plant? So it's not just taking a soil test. You're going to have to monitor your plants. Next one. So all the years in my lifetime, and I don't know where I get these things, I read too much and study too much. What you're looking at for the background, by the way, that's the field that we just planted to corn. That's what our soil looks like. You don't run a tine weeder. That's called a dump rig. And you don't run a cultivator with lots of shovels. You got a buffalo cultivator and a rotary hoe. You can't get through that field. And you can see we're planted down in those furrows because you can't plant in all those residues. But weeds can't grow in those either. See, they got to have soil seed contact. But years ago, and it's still in every textbook in science and in agriculture on soils, that you have to have a certain level of minerals in the soil, and then that your plant root runs into these nutrients and they say it doesn't matter what source your NP and K comes from. And by abiotic, is that why this whole thing, I have to have a certain level of minerals that my roots have got to come in contact with. So there's a physical chemical process of roots tapping into nutrients, and they want to have soluble nutrients, and they're absorbed by the roots, and it's pH dependent. So some of the issues that I constantly fight is that if you're organic and you want to have a 6.5 pH, I think you're making a mistake. I'm down there in Illinois, and those guys refuse to want to put on any calcium source because their pHs are 6.5. 6.5 pHs if your soil is bone dead. What if the earthworms want it to be 7? What if your minerals are in a carbon biological cycle? The pH does no longer matter. It does not matter. Our pHs on our farm run from low 7s, probably 7.2, 7.3, somewhere in there. And I do a lot of work in North Dakota and Montana and Canada, 8 pHs. They can still grow crops, folks, but they cannot dump on certain nutrients and expect the plant to get them. You better add humates to your phosphorus source. You better do different things with biological. But now that's abiotic. You're organic. Let's look at the biotic side. That means the biology delivering the minerals. It relies on microbial communities breaking down residues and dishing out minerals. So the minerals got to be in that carbon biological cycle. They locate, they solubilize, and they transport them to the roots. So I think we got to rethink a lot of things. And one is how minerals are actually gotten into a plant. And because organically, you need to rely on the biotic and not so much on the soluble nutrients, because they can cause troubles. What's the number one reason insects attack your crop? Lack of sulfur and incomplete proteins. Soluble nitrogen sucked up into a plant. Bugs and diseases, they really thrive on incomplete proteins. You can get that from manure too. Next one. So I'm going through this fairly fast. You can hit the next one there. So obviously, if you got questions, I know I come in it fairly fast, but whoops. I think you go back to the soil aggregate one out there. Went too far there. Again, yes, I like showing off our soil. And yes, that's tilled, isn't it? But that's the green crop you're looking at in there. That green crop is a bacteria food, which gives us our soluble nutrients. And you see our soil structure out here. I don't need to measure soil health. I need to measure soil chemistry. I can look and walk your soil. I can take a shovel and I can dig down. I can tell if you got life in your soil or not. I can smell it. I can see worms in it. But soil aggregation. Why would soil life want your soil to look like this? This is what our farm looks like. Why would they want that? Because they want to breathe. They need air. They need to have a carbon dioxide exchange. The number one yield limiting factor on most farms is carbon dioxide. It's got to be digestion taking place in the soil and the carbon dioxide released, and the stomata on the bottom of the leaf absorb the carbon dioxide. Anybody that grows giant pumpkins, if they're going to really win contests, they're going to put on dry ice, which is carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a major limiting factor on a lot of farms. And so that loose, crumbling ground allows for a gas exchange to take place. The life in the soil gets air, and it releases carbon dioxide. It's the releasing of that carbon dioxide, and when it gets released, it's not driving it down a big hole in the ground. Our plants need that carbon dioxide, but to do a lot of tillage and release carbon dioxide when there's nothing green growing is probably a mistake. Next one. So, getting my minerals in a carbon biological cycle. What are the methods? Humates. Humates is a good source. I like the natural mind. I'm not a big on taking an extract. So humic acid, as you know, it is not an acid. It's got a pH about 9 to 11 because they use potassium or sodium hydroxide to extract it. Instead of extracting it, why don't we put the whole humate? Humate's got a 3.7 pH or 3.4 pH. So if you got something that's very acidic and you add minerals, what does it mean when the pH is less than 7? It means you're missing minerals. If you look at all those sites on that clay or humus particle here, if every site's got a mineral on it, your pH is 7. If you're missing minerals, you got a low pH. So if I add something to humates that got a 3.4 pH, now the minerals, there's all kinds of open sites. The cation exchange capacity of humates is like 300 and some. So I like the natural mind material because there's human is the sponge part of your humates. Humic acid is what's been extracted as a high pH, and fulvic acid is the one that needs to be mixed with foliar sprays and things because that's got a 2.9 pH, and that's a smaller particle. So they each have their place, but I like taking the whole humate and mixing it with lime or mixing it with rock phosphate or mixing it, putting it on you. See, I'm here in Missouri, and what do you think these organic farmers do with humates? put it down on the floor in their chicken buildings to absorb the nitrogen, to cut down on the odors in their chicken buildings, along with using gypsum. It's heavily used. So now, mixing humus with things, it doesn't matter what your soil pH is, because now I got my mineral hooked to a good carbon source that can now release it and break down with biology. I can also blend humates with compost. And there's in natural compost is 3 to 5% humates. So that's one system of getting more nutrient efficiency, adding humates to your fertilizers or your manure sources or something else. The next one is, this is our farm. This is a mistake. You know, I might be over 80 years old, but I can still make mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I can still do that. You'll never get done with that. See, we frost seed clover, but whoops, went too far. Go back. So we frost seed clover, and you can see on that picture, we're trying to combine rye. I don't need to combine rye. We got 25,000 bushel of rye that we're almost giving it away. You want to buy rye? How about $4 a bushel? How much do you want? Can't get rid of it. And what to do with rye? People don't want to feed it. The only animal that really feeds well on rye is a hog. Now, I'm talking to Will down there in Iowa or in Illinois about that. We love to there's a lot of industrial alcohol. It doesn't have to all go into booze that we can make from rye. And then the mash would be feedable to livestock as a nice alternative feed source. So a year ago, it was really wet in the fall, and we didn't get our rye plant until after the ground froze. I can plant rye at Christmas and still get it to grow. We frost seed our clover. It was really wet early spring, and our clover overpowered our rye. And you can see this is clover that was seeded the first week of March into that rye. And so obviously we're not going to combine that. We just batwing mow it down and it stays out there. So we get 4 clover growths in a year. This is our first one. So getting our minerals into that clover, I've done a lot of testing of that stuff out here. I want to get my minerals in that carbon biological cycle. And so I've done a lot of mineral measurements of that. So then if this is really digestible, it can't be old dead mature plants like that straw breaks down really slow and the soil life eat first. If that's fairly highly digestible, you determine how fast you want to release the nutrients by the word digestibility, which us dairy people understand really well. Would I feed that to a milk cow to get 100 pounds of milk? That's how you got to feed your corn. Whatever you're feeding your soil, you got to look like you're trying to feed a cow to get 100 pounds of milk. And what would that feed look like? It wouldn't be dead and mature. So that's one way of holding minerals, is get them in that cover crops, get them in that clover. And there's where we get our 400 units of nitrogen. We get 4 growths of that clover. So Brian, I see, just asked me what kind of clover that is. So I saw the little note popped up on my computer. Brian, nice seeing you on board. Brian was a BioAg consultant a long time ago. He's probably got gray hair by now. I haven't seen him for a while. But anyway, we do red clover. Now, it's not mammoth red clover. We buy that Freedom, or they got new names now. They bred red clover. Oh, he says he's been with us 30 years. Whew. Time goes by, doesn't it? That's how I got to be 80 years old. I was your age when it started. But anyway, so Freedom red clover is a 4-cut system. Mammoth red clover, some of those are a 1 or 2 cut system. We want to get the one to grow under our rye. We want to clip that. We want another one to grow back. We possibly might clip it twice. And then now it's the middle of September. We put a ton of compost on an acre. Then that grows back and it's knee high when it's going into winter. And then the following spring, when it gets a foot tall, we turn it back into the soil. Mammoth red clover won't do that. So half of what we seed, we put 15 pounds of clover seed per acre, frost seeded. We're going to do that here. My son's putting up the equipment together the other day when I was there. We're kind of jumping the gun a little, but we'll wait till the 1st of March. Because I got to give the rye a chance to get ahead of the clover. See, what happened a year ago, we didn't give the rye a chance to get big enough. We frost seeded clover. That's why it's hard to do a spring planted small grain and put clover on it, because the clover may win. But if you got winter wheat, or you got rye that's already an inch or 2 tall when you spread the clover out there, boy, the wheat and the rye can certainly stay ahead of it. But you see, our rye wasn't really growing really well because of our late planting. So half of it's that expensive red clover. We put 15 pounds of seed per acre. A fourth of it's white clover, just because it's got a different rooting system, and a fourth of it's sweet clover. Now, a lot of the tall stuff you're seeing in here is sweet clover. Now, that generally will only be there this first time. Sweet clover you see a few plants later on. By the following spring, by the next spring, it'll be 95% red clover. Red clover is the one that wins. The white clover is always kind of there, but not near as much. And the sweet clover kind of won't be any back the next year. That's pretty well, yellow blossom sweet clover is pretty well gone. So those are the 3 clovers. and we're spitting out about 15 pounds of seed per acre. And everybody said, oh my gosh, 2 pounds of clover can make a difference. And I said, I told my son, you could probably cut down to 10 pounds. You don't need to do this. And he won't do it. See, farmers are bullheaded when they get success. Why would he back off? He said, that's my fertilizer. He said, I don't want to back down. He said, I don't mind spending the money. And we had to put that on there. So, yes. So Brian said he had a similar situation with his red clover in rye last year because it was a perfect year for clover to grow. And rye got a little bit of a late start because of the fall before. All right. So minerals in that cover crop. Next one. So this is on our farm. See, we're the only purebred organic farm that I know around because we get organic chicken manure because we sell our corn to Phil's Organic Eggs in Spring Green. Well, now their mill is shut down and they're buying their grain from Cashton, but we still get only, I need to get, there's a lot of chicken buildings around us. I can get it. So we only put on organic chicken manure. And what you see added to that, we actually have taken hay off of our pastures and other carbon sources. We used to have 100 acres of creek bottom pasture where our cows were grazing for 25 years, and the nutrient level in those soils is unbelievable. Organic farming is not very good on nutrient management. Wherever you graze your cows, and you can't, we're had 300 cows and farming in 600-700 acres in a 40-mile circle. So cows couldn't get on all the land, and a lot of the manure got down on the pasture. So now we're cutting that hay. We batwing mow it down. So it's already chewed up. Now we bale it in big round bales and we unroll it and put the chicken manure on top of it. And what you're seeing there, the kind of red stuff up front, that's elemental sulfur. Now I don't like elemental sulfur. I always wanted to use calcium sulfate, potassium sulfate, but I don't need calcium anymore, and I don't need potassium. I don't need any minerals. And so therefore, having this thing out here, so we're really adding boron and sulfur. Now on the piles to the right, that white stuff, that's that rock phosphate source from Falcon Isles out in Utah. I think it's the Spanish Forks in Utah. It's the cleanest, best phosphorus source. It's 28% phosphorus with 12% soluble. And then I also got sunflower oil ash from my potassium source. And we have a couple of fields that need some P and K yet, but they're not just P and K. There's all kinds of sunflower ash has got phosphorus and all kinds of other minerals in it. So that's why those big white piles. That's only on just a couple of small fields. We take one small windrow, we add otherwise it's just sulfur and boron is what we add. So now those minerals are in that carbon biological cycle. I did a lot of research at the University of Wisconsin about boron. Boron leaches really fast, but mixing it in a carbon source or mixing it with humates or mixing it with compost really saves it from leaching. Otherwise, our light soils, it just moves, it goes. So those are good things. That elemental sulfur, I can still find BBs a year after we put it on our land. That doesn't break down very fast. I'm not excited about elemental sulfur, but I need sulfur and I don't know of any other source. I don't need any other mineral. So that's why we end up putting that on. Next one. This is Jason Fuller from Marshall, Wisconsin. Jason, I'm working with him right now. He does about 40,000 tons of compost a year. And yes, they're not necessarily organic sources, but that's the designer compost. I did that with the Savannah Institute on their trees and got them in production 1 year earlier by really mineralizing for their trees. I've really made quite a difference on growing trees. The guy on your left in the picture, he's from Malaysia. They're the #1 makers of biochar. So there's biochar added to it. There's calcium sources added to it. There's different things added to that to make what we call living carbon or designer compost. And the guy in the middle, Barry Middling, used to be one of our consultants. He's a goat farmer. He has 2,500 goats in southern Wisconsin. He's the most successful goat farmer I've ever been around in my life. So if he's into goats, he's down there on a large farm. I don't think he has 2,500 goats yet, but he had that many in Mexico, and he's trying. That's a farm has the capacity for 2,500 goats. So anyway, they're out there. That building right there was it was a CAFO, and it was at the building we're in is 100 feet wide, 800 feet long. And so that's where we're going to make in the compost. And we're putting a pelleting operation in and all kinds of things to delivering our minerals with compost and getting minerals mixed in that carbon biological cycle. Next one. So then here's another one. Now, this is, I think, a missed opportunity for a lot of people. Oats and buckwheat. What do they have in common? Oats and buckwheat have the most acidic roots of any crop you can grow. Your grandparents grew oats because they didn't have sulfur. They didn't understand it. And see, my dad was really interesting. I don't know where I was raised up in the Fox River Valley by Green Bay. Anyway, he wanted to plant his oats as early as possible. he wanted his oats to get snowed on. And so we went out in the springtime. Now it's a little too warm right now, but let's say there's about, the ground is starting to thaw, to be about a half inch of mud on top of the soil. Take that old 8N Ford and a grain drill and start planting oats. Right in that frozen ground, you're not gonna sink in the soil very far, and that oats planted into that mud. So on the left-hand side of this picture, that was rye planted in the fall, and that's oats planted in the spring. So you could be planting oats right now. You can plant oats anytime. You can spin oats on, but see, now that oats is sucked up more nutrients. It's got very acidic roots. It's that feed right there. If you fed that forage from that oats to cows as a dairy feed, it killed more cows than any feed we ever fed them. Because oats sucks up minerals like they're going through a straw. Nitrates, potash, it just phosphorus. It's got very acidic roots and it just sucks up nutrients. It really does well on low fertility ground. So now I got those minerals in that carbon biological cycle. So why not start? The guy said, "Oh, I didn't get my cover crops planted last fall." Plant oats and peas this spring. Let them grow, let them get a foot tall, work them in the ground, even in front of corn. As long as they're young and succulent, they provide a lot of nutrients. Don't let them get so big that they rob from your corn. But oats is a wonderful crop and very inexpensive and works on most farms. If you didn't get anything planted last fall, get at it next week. Next one. So earthworms, see that little pile of worms? And you see our soils out here. Earthworms are 5 to 7 times higher in channels in the soil in potassium and phosphorus. So they actually get our minerals into, they're making minerals more available. That's all I wanted to show with that one. Next one. And then the mycorrhizae. See, everybody says, "Oh, you can't do tillage and you'll kill the mycorrhizae." Did you notice something with that picture? Where is the mycorrhizae? Well, how about you can till all you want to the top 2 or 3 inches? You're not going to destroy mycorrhizae. And how do you know if you have mycorrhizae? Do a phosphorus test. On our farm, as a dairy farm, in our forages, in our feed, if I can double the phosphorus uptake, there's only one way you can get that much phosphorus on an organic farm, and that's with the presence of mycorrhizae. I spoke at that old grain conference in Madison, and someone said, "Your tillage is destroying mycorrhizae." And I said, "How would you know?" And I showed them a feed test, and then they got quiet because we have doubled the phosphorus uptake in our forages for our cows, because you see, mycorrhizae doubles your root system, and it lives much deeper than 2 inches in the soil. So that's another way to bring in more minerals to your plant. Next one. I see time keeps going. I've been at this for quite a while already. I got way too many slides, and I'm probably covering too much materials out here. So sorry about that. So I just wanted just a couple of things. You can kick up 5 things here on the soil test. Why do you do a soil test? I stick to the old soil tests that are around forever, and they still are the base that you need to be. I can look at your soil. I can look at your crops. I can tell you if you have biology in your soil, but I can't tell you with the minerals. Now, my dad, when I was a kid, he'd walk around the fields and pick up soil and he'd taste it. He said, "Oh, we better lime this one. She's starting to taste a little sour." That's not true, is it? So you can kick up the next 4 things on the sides. There's some things here. So what type of soil is that? I need to take a soil test for these reasons. Well, how do I know what type of soil it is? I need to know that. So how much I need to add? I need to know what do I need to look at? The CEC, the organic matter, and the pH. I saw soils today that was 3 with a 5.3 pH. And once you see that, you now have your marching orders. The rest of the soil test has no value. Once your pHs are that low, you're getting a phony extraction. I do want to know what P and Ks. The universities aren't all wrong, but after 40 years of doing it, don't we have enough by now? And where is your calcium and magnesium? Let's address that and find out what sources fit your farm. If you got a neutral pH, putting on lime is kind of a dumb idea, but gypsum might fit that farm, especially if you got heavy clay soils. And where are your trace minerals? So that's why I take a soil test, and we sample every 3 to 5 years. I don't need to do this every year. Once I got an idea what my soil looks like and I'm heading towards some correction. So right now, we're not soil sampling at all. I'm a soils guy. We have nothing left to fix. Our soils are fixed. I have to take samples because we use sulfur and boron, and they're restricted. So the inspectors every year say, "You got a soil test that demonstrates you need those?" And so I got to go. I sample one farm every year, so I do. They can look at them, but it's very seldom. But that's why you take a soil test. Those reasons right there. Then the last one, if you got livestock, there's one more on there. And the last one out there is it says. Do you want to hit the next one? It's uniformity. If you're feeding livestock, all the soil tests need to look alike. All right, you want to go to the next slide? So a soil test can't tell you what the land produces, only what it contains, because it doesn't tell you if those minerals get into the plant or not. Next one. So Soil test does not tell you whether the nutrients are plant available. It doesn't tell you if there's biology in the soil. It doesn't tell you if the soil is as hard as a concrete walkway. It doesn't tell you if the organisms can breathe. So a soil test, don't make it something it's not. Don't make soil testing a religion. Every 3 to 5 years you take a soil test, and once you know what you need to do, then you start working on that. But you've got more to do than just deal with the minerals. Next one. And I mentioned that before. I like to separate out soil correction from crop fertilizer. Next one. This is our farm after in 2012 up to today. See, our organic matter, we went from 2.4 to 2.9. We're on light sandy loam soils. 10.9 CEC, we went up 1 point on CEC. That's the nutrient holding capacity. We certainly didn't get more clay, but we got more humus. And everybody says, boy, that's not very good organic matter. You see, if someone comes along and tells you you raise your organic matter 1% a year, you better do a math lesson. 2 million pounds in the top soil. What's 1%? 20,000 pounds. 20,000 pounds of organic matter required 200,000 pounds of residues to make that happen. So someone said they raised their organic matter 1%. The fastest way to raise organic matter, as I tell people, and they joke about it, you got to switch labs. Go to Logan Lab, you'll get 1% more organic matter on your soil test, and then you can feel better. But if you look at that, my phosphorus levels, they went up. They were 46 and 78. My readily available in my reserve. See, the university says 25 and 50, and I think they're wrong. That might be for conventional, but then they also keep putting on commercial fertilizer when even if they got a 25 and a 50. I'd rather be 50 and 100. Now, if you look, we're 70 and 113. Perfect. What happened since we got rid of the dairy farm, when we had dairy cows, we put on 200 pounds of potassium sulfate every year and 50 pounds of homogenized trace minerals. Very seldom did I need phosphorus, and we dealt with our calcium. See, and then, but our potassium levels, we were 130 parts per million. We had a 3% base saturation in 2012. Now we're 4.6. Our potassium level keeps getting higher and higher and higher and higher. It's the thing that you got the biggest reserve in your soil is potassium. And now I'm actually almost at an excessive level. Now, if you look at calcium, it was 69%, 60. Now we're 72. I can't stop it. We over-limed in the past. Those little crystals of lime might take 20 years to break down. So I'm not a believer. A ton of lime at one time is an absolute big enough dose. I was looking at those soils down here with that 5.3 pH. I said, don't you dare put 5 tons of lime on. You'll get your numbers up there really fast, but then you're done. I'd rather the road to Rome is more fun than being in Rome. I'd rather go slowly at building my calcium level and constantly be able to use some. Our magnesium levels dropped a little bit. You can see the next one, sulfur. See, our sulfur levels have dropped, and we are not getting free sulfur out of the atmosphere anymore. You better deal with sulfur. Our zinc levels went up. Manganese is not a reliable test. The test says we're low, but if you go to our feed test or our tissue test, we're double. Our manganese levels are double. Manganese is a biological mineral. It's not very reliable on the soil test. Iron, I'm not sure what to do with. Our copper levels have come up. Our boron levels have come up, and our pHs are now around 7. So what would you sell me? Try to sell me some fertilizer. What do you think I need to buy? You see why we're not buying nutrients anymore? Because we have already fixed these soils. Next one. So keep going. Just punch down on quite a few of them. So anyway, I just want to say there's more to it than NP and K, and I need plant available soluble calcium, and there's ratios between the minerals, there's sufficiency levels of minerals, and there's different sources of minerals. We got to look at what's known about chemistry. Next one. So then, as a biological farmer or organic farmer, I can use any mineral anybody else can. They just got to use different sources, and some of them are going to be less soluble, and I got to make them more soluble. Next one. Just keep punching them all down until I get to the bottom. Minerals belong in that carbon biological cycle. There's soil correction, and there's crop fertilizer, and biological farming is about prevention and reducing the negatives. Next one. So I just got to go through. This is our farm, which is how we make our money is on corn. And this is Taliesin that you're looking at. That in the background is that Romeo and Juliet windmill when that was built 100 years ago. Frank Lloyd Wright's uncle said that dumb thing will blow over in the first storm. They're all dead and gone, and there it stands. So I think it was built well enough to last for generations. But see, we like to grow corn, and we got shredder heads on the combine, and we shred the corn down. And then after this corn, while that corn has still got living juice in those stalks. 40 years ago, I worked with A.M. Smith Harvester. I did consulting for Harvester. And we used to chop those corn stalks right behind the combine and put them in the harvester silo to make feed for dry cows. If you wait a week, you got bedding. There's still living juice in those stalks, even if you're combining in November. And so we'd like to plant our rye we combine today, we can only, our bins only hold about 10,000 bushel a day. So what we combine today, tomorrow morning, my son will be planting rye into it. We like to plant. Now, last year we broke down and didn't all get done. So anyway, next one. So here's how we plant now. You can see we got a shredder heads on the combine, so we don't want to make extra trips over the field. We got an 8-row head and we do 12-row equipment. You see, we cultivate that corn in this hill. You can notice we got pretty good weed control. So that's a Kuhn-Krause interceptor. It's a high-speed disc, and you can see there's a seeder on front. We don't want to plant the rye in rows anymore. We're bulk spreading it so it's not in rows, because in a row where the rye is planted, there's no clover going to grow, and then in between the row, I got room for weeds and everything else to go. So we'd only plant about a bushel. This last year, we switched to Danko rye. And Danko rye is really gem. If you're having trouble with rye lodging, you need to switch varieties. I used to do Hazlitt and Ryman, and they just fall down all the time. I didn't want to kill my clover, so we kept reducing down on the amount of seed we planted per acre. So now we're back up to some fields this year. We did 2 bushel of rye. I got to get enough rye so I can suppress that clover so it doesn't get so big. But you see, all that disc is doing is leveling out those hills that are in that cornfield and giving me enough soil so I can frost seed clover. You can't frost seed clover on corn stalks because the seeds will never hit the ground. I got to have some kind of soil exposed. And so now that land that you're looking at will not get tilled now for another 18 months. We'll frost seed clover in the spring. We combine some rye. We clip it a couple times, put compost on the fall. And the following spring, you can see the green fields in that picture. They're the following spring. Now they will become our corn. So it's every 18 months that we do a tillage passes on our farm. So we like our system. Next one. You want to get the next one? All right. You can see in the springtime, this is what it looks like. Next one. That's when it worked right. And here's we got a batwing mower. We got 20-foot batwing mowers, and we mow that down. And you can see, look at this picture right here. So we batwing mow that down. Someone said, could I graze my cattle on that? Oh, absolutely. You probably could. You notice there's no fences, and we're farming a 45-mile circle, and we don't have any water out here, and we don't have any cattle. So we just batwing mow down. We feed it to our soil livestock. I had a guy come by. He said, could I get that and feed it to my cattle? And I said, there's way too much straw and residue. How are you going to rake it? There was a note flipped up here, but I missed reading it. Someone had a question.
Yeah, Evan said,
what? You're on mute.
Yeah, that was really weird. Evan said, what variety of rye do you plant?
We plant Danko. It's Polish rye. I was over in Poland, and I said to them, their rye looked absolutely gorgeous. I said, what kind of rye is it? He said, well, we got 17 varieties of rye over, just like you do on corn. And I said, oh, in America, we got one from Poland called Danko. Danko rye will stand in a storm. We got that new stuff that somebody found in the little cracks of their barn seed. We did 10 acres of that this year, but that Danko really stands. But you see our trouble last year with our rye. We didn't really care. We mowed it down, and then I went out and I measured what's in this. The two, we mowed this down twice. So next one. So this is just on 2 clovers. Those 2 clovers of soy. There'll be 2 more. That clover goes back after we batwing more. So going into the winter, then that clover would be knee high again. And next spring, when it gets 8 inches, 6 to 8 inches tall, foot tall, we take it down. So just measuring what's in that clover, those 2 clovers I just showed you under that rye, 186 units of N, 11 of salt, 95 of phosphorus, 200 of potash, 18 of magnesium, 79 of calcium, 2 pounds of trace minerals. Most of your trace minerals, by the way, are in your roots. I did a lot of testing out here, and if I look at your roots are where there's a higher concentration of trace. Now, I'm only measuring what's above ground, not what's below the ground. So you can see why we start our growing season with 400 units of nitrogen. Next one. So this is what it would look like going into. This is what it looks like going into the winter. You can see that it's pretty big and mature out here, and if we have to clip it. I probably, in the beginning, we only clipped if there were weeds in it, but the trouble is the clover got chest high and it fell over and it killed itself. So that's Taliesin you're looking at there in the background, but that's what our clover would look like going into the winter. Next one. And of course, it's green. I had a guy from Australia a couple of days ago, and it was still green. Here's what it does in the springtime. When that gets that tall, there's about a 4-inch blanket of residues from the year before on the ground. That right there, if you put your cows into the graze, the manure is going to squirt right out the back end. And that's because it's so highly digestible. And that's what you want to feed your corn. See, now we work that in, and that's with our high-speed Lemkin disc out here. And that's worked in at that stage because I need that. That'll warm your soil by 10 degrees. We start about the 10th of May taking down our clover. And then we wait a week and we run the coon grouse interceptor. And then when it gets time and ready to plant, we do have to, our fields got so rough. All these residues, all those high-speed discs puke out speed bumps. You can't even rotary hoe it anymore. So we had to get a soil finisher to level them out, which actually worked quite well for us. So the first pass, we might be going 4 to 5 inches deep based on the amount of residues. I got to show some soil. The second pass is always shallower, and the big soil finisher is just to level our fields on. It might only be an inch or two deep. So every pass is shallower, and then that gives us a clean bed to plant in because otherwise it's so rough out there we can't hardly farm it. Next one. I did all my cost and share my economics. So here's based on our whole farm. You got to look at this. Now, these are nutrients that are on, some on the soil test, some in the cover crops, some in the compost that we add, and some and it's not including everything that's out here. There's also some other measurements. We start out with about, this is measuring our cover crops and our looking at what comes from a soil test and looking what we added out there with the compost. We got 390 units of nitrogen, 576 of phosphorus in an exchangeable form, 932 of potash, and almost 1,000 pounds of sugar is what we put back in the soil. You see why we don't buy fertilizer? That's a huge amount of exchangeable nutrients. They're not just tied up in the soil. They're all hooked to carbon of some kind or another. Next one. Now, this is really interesting. On the left-hand side is when the old days when we used to still grow soybeans. You can see they're all yellow. So after soybeans, we planted rye, and then we frost seeded clover into the rye. After the crops are following soybeans, like I said, the following year that was corn. On the right-hand side where it's green out here, that was clover and rye. And the left-hand side was soybeans. You see what's happening on our farm. That was following the rye and the clover. It was corn, and now it's back into rye again. And we got that much of a nitrogen carryover. Our nitrogen levels keep getting higher and higher and higher and higher in our soil. So we're having that much nitrogen carryover. That's 2 years since we put a clover crop back in the soil, and we're showing that make a difference. And see, soybeans don't really give you any nitrogen. Did you notice that? Next one. I do tissue tests. Soil testing is your project. Tissue testing is your report card. Now, notice what we're really high in: nitrogen, potash. For whatever reason, we don't know, that's zinc. I have to do a lot more testing. I've been a little weak on this. We get busy. I like to measure that corn crop when it's about a foot tall and also take the leaf opposite the ear. And so this is on one of our fields. It's pretty uniform across, but you got to see, just like taking a sap test, you got to do it weekly to get a really good picture. You got to do this year in and year out, because if it's dry or if it's wet, all these things make a difference. I want to make sure I'm getting my mineral uptake. So it says, what stage do you take tissue? Do you do the tissue testing? I like to go out there, and I did it last year because I grew some of Walter Goldstein's high nutrition corn. We did it when it was a foot tall, and then I went back and I did the leaf opposite the ear 2 times during the corn growing season. Now, if I want to do small grains, I guess I'd look. See, when I was a dairy farmer, we tested our hay all the time. We tested our feeds all the time. I had a pretty good report card of a mature plant. So now we got one that's only a foot tall and growing, the corn. And then we got one that's the leaf opposite the ear. And always take your best, most healthy looking crop. If it's sick, you already know that. You don't need to test it. You want to say, is the best crop got a limiting factor somehow that I'm missing something? And you can't just do one like we got here. You got to do quite a few of them. But the nitrogen and the potassium are real. I'm not sure what's going on with zinc. A friend of mine said, because if you get your nitrogen that high, he went through a whole, he got way too much science in his head of why zinc is high. It's because my nitrogen's high. I'm getting more zinc availability. I don't know if that's true or not. Somebody might have a better answer to that thing. Tissue testing versus sap testing. See, sap testing is like they've been doing patio testing in Idaho on potatoes for the last 50 years. Sap testing needs to be done weekly. It needs to get, see, before rain, after rain. It is not a stable once-a-year measurement. I'm sorry, it varies all the time. Before drought, before rain, after rain. So it's you're measuring sap going up and down the plant. Whereas a tissue test when it's growing, it's kind of telling you what is happening when it's growing, but you got to take a lot of them. Just take a water-soluble soil test. You need to do them weekly for a year in one spot the size of your tabletop, and tell me what happens. pH will go from 5.5 to 7 in one growing system on light soils. Sap tests are extremely variable. It's pretty hard to make a management decision. I've kind of got I did a whole bunch. I spent $5,000 doing sap testing. I was trying to make some value out of it. I can't come up with some way to improve my farm. I'm just having struggles with the thing out here. And most of the time it says I need molybdenum and I need cobalt and I need some of these things. And maybe I do, and maybe I would see some benefit to that. But I want to see a feed test measures what happened during the whole growing season. A tissue test, I'm taking the leaf opposite the ear on corn. That's what happened the whole time. A sap test is what's happening today. Only what's happening today. It does not measure. If it rains tomorrow, it'll be totally different. Just do enough of it. That's my theory on it. I could be wrong. Next one. So soil health. Next one. Punch up. See, it's the capacity to function without intervention. Next one. See, now I shouldn't be critical here, but I'm going to be a little bit. It's the only thing our government got really right. And then I try to thank them for it, and they don't know who did it. NRCS, who did this soil health thing? Ray Archuleta? He's not with them anymore, but see, this is soil health, and I think this is spot on. Water infiltration is number one for soil health. That's got to be able to breathe. Nutrient cycling, and that doesn't mean pumping it back up through your irrigation water. That means cycling through plants and biology. Minimum disturbance, doesn't say no disturbance. No crust on top of the ground, and that's why no-till fails. You get that crust and it can't breathe. Plant diversity. Got to have a lot of different plants and living roots all the time. See, we were taught years ago, the idea was that if you want to grow organic matter, you got to put complex plants in the soil. And now it's all about liquid carbon. Living roots and living plants are photosynthesizing, putting sugar back in the soil. I tell people it's an incredible analogy. If you want to make your cattle fat, do you feed them fat? You feed them energy. If you want to grow more organic matter in your soil, you don't have to add the organic matter. Everything you add to your soil, except biochar, is going to get eaten by somebody. Now, putting sugar in the soil, with an excess amount of sugar, the life in the soil builds its own complex carbons. You don't need to add them. Sugar, the plant will make that complex carbon, just like that animal will make itself fat if you got extra energy added to it. And then I added the word minerals. Your government didn't do that because, see, that's a sacred cow. If you want to get in a fight with every university out here, just tell them you need minerals to make soil healthy. And what minerals would you add? You better be calcium and phosphorus on your list, or the top two ones out here. And then you got to deal with residue decay. This is what makes soil healthy. Get all this thing here to work. Next one. So can we have too much soil health? Of course, I keep flipping up my soils out here, and probably not. Next one. I see my time has gone way beyond. I appreciate you staying here. So John Lundgren, the 1,000 Farm Challenge. Anybody involved with that thing out here? I was in Ireland here in November when John was there, and he said the guys that got the healthiest soil are the ones that do no-till and have cover crops, and he was going on, and I stood up. It costs $7,500 to have your farm tested, but they pay for it, this 1,000 Farm Challenge. I stood up and said, John, I hate to tell you this, I said, but the 3 farms that are on top of your list are all organic, and I'm one of them. And I said, that's my soil right here. I got the highest water infiltration compared to anybody else. That's my water infiltration you're looking at on our soil. We saw the soils. Next one.
Gary, just to let you know, too, you have 20 minutes.
20 more minutes. Okay. Yeah, I should be able to make it through what I got here. Next one. So anyway, water infiltration is big on that. There's a whole bunch of other slides I got from that 1,000 Farm Challenge, and there's another farm in Wisconsin doing it. And I was up in Canada in Winnipeg, and there's a farm up there. He's got the same kind of looking soils that I do, and he's a Mr. Carbon Grower himself. He's just carbon copy of what I do, only he's in Winnipeg. I did a field days on my farm with O'Grain a couple of years ago. The soil on the left was our neighbors. If you're doing a field days, you always got to compare yourself to the neighbors. And so I went and dug up the neighbors, and the soil was. And I was shocked. It had a better root system than it deserved based on the hard fact it was growing in concrete. And that on the right is our soil. I went back about 5 days later. This was 5 days after I dug those out. And the soil is all dried out on the neighbor's farm. And look at ours. It's moist. It's holding moisture. And that's called resilience. My son would rather have a drought than rain. We do really well during dry periods because we have built that resilience in our soil. And that was pretty amazing. I went back and I was just in shock. And you can see what the ground looks like around it. That's all our cover crop stuff down there. I kind of cut the stuff in that area. That's all the rye straw and everything else that's around it. Next one. Hit. Excellent. So that's why the other thing I got to get on to is this liquid carbon. See, if you want to build carbons in your soil, it's a balance between photosynthesis and the production of photosynthetic production and microbial decomposition. So if you're going to do tillage and have microbial organisms eat down your residues, you make sure you're putting enough sugar back in the ground with photosynthesis. And that's how you build soil carbons. There's the roots, double my root system. And a lot of the roots are more complex carbons than above ground. And there's all kinds of other things involved. But that Alan Philo and Gary Hatfield and Ken Wake came up with this liquid carbon thing. There should be a new article coming out on it. If you haven't followed their articles on liquid carbon, Christine Jones out of Australia started this thing a little bit too. It's the liquid added to your soil from photosynthesis that's really building your organic matter. Next one. See, whoops. You want to go back? You want two. Go on there. No, there's one in between. Somehow it got missed. I don't know. Maybe you did two before. Anyway, that's a perfect soil test. Doesn't go. See those beautiful, nice root systems in there, and they ought to not be able to wash the dirt off. And go to the next one. That one. See, if you dig up a root, this is what it ought to look like. And you see why I want to leave middle zone alone. If you look at the top of the picture, if you do tillage up there, leave these root channels in the ground. And you see that plant's spewing out all those exudates, providing it's healthy and got enough, producing enough photosynthesis by healthy wide leaves and a lot of ability to produce photosynthesis. And magnesium is definitely involved in photosynthesis, just as iron is involved in your blood. Magnesium is the blood of the plant, is really involved with having a lot of magnesium uptake. And to get more magnesium uptake, you're going to add sulfur. But that's another topic. But see all that? So if your next crop can grow down that root from the decaying one from the year before, you're in the most fertile spot on your farm. Next one. So just showing a picture of what our soil looked like when we plant. You know, it's a little. We got row cleaners on the planter because you can't plant and all that stuff otherwise. And we don't run tine weeders, like I said. We run rotary hose. So I'll put a plug in for TH Manufacturing, El Paso, Illinois. We really like their rotary hoe. We finally got a rotary hoe that's not made out of a piece of junk from some other spot of the world. They do a really good job. They cut them out of a piece of metal, and I really like it. And I put a little trial one together last year. They're much heavier made, and they got big spoons on them. They finally got a bearing that doesn't wear out in 2 years. And it does a much better job. They're much more aggressive. They got big spoons welded on them, so we like their rotary hoe. Next one. So you can tap through a few of them right here because I'm going to go, what about biology? You want to put some more up here? You can smell it. Do you need to test it? What is soil health? What is soil fertility? You can not only control what lives in the soil, but how many of them, based on how much you feed and how in ideal conditions you make. And soil life likes its food on top. It likes to be left alone, but they need to be fed. And so that's why you can do anything you want to the top couple inches. That's the highly active where the fence post rots off. So I think then we know a lot about the soil things out here. Next one. So plants determine the soil life. Just go down through the whole bunch here. So soil life diversity comes from feeding different foods at different maturities. See, if it's young and green and succulent, I showed you my little green carbon out here. If it's young and green and succulent, it feeds bacteria. You cannot, if you're organic, you better not be fungal dominated. You'll have a beautiful raising of organic matter, and you'll have lousy crops. You need soluble nutrients to grow corn and wheat, a lot of soluble nutrients, and they come from bacteria, not from fungal. Fungal eats the complex carbons. The soil life eats first. You got to have bacteria food to give me that's my fertilizer. I mean, cows and soils are similar. Calcium is king, and digestibility of the foods affect the next crop. I was out at Penn State, and they had hairy vetch in one field. The hairy vetch, the corn was all yellow and looked really bad. And the guy said, we don't understand. That was the most nitrogen credits we've ever grown. And next to it, they had a field where they put young succulent clover down, and that corn was bright and soluble and green. And I said, it's not about nitrogen credits. It's about digestibility. Who's eating it and how fast are they breaking it down? And when do you want it broken down? If I'm growing soybeans, I don't want it broken down right away. I'll put more mature plants. If I'm growing wheat or corn, you better feed it soluble nutrients. And that comes from bacteria food. Next one. Yeah, I go through a whole bunch of these things. This is on cover crops, and I won't spend a lot of time in it. We all know the benefits. Why don't more people do it? What's really interesting, that's mustard you're looking at out here, and this is in Colorado. This is Rocky Farms. And that mustard, see, if you got a yellow flower, it's supposed to be high in calcium. So I went and tested that. What's really interesting is really high in sulfur. That's why mustard's a biofumigant. These soils are sandy soils, low in sulfur. That plant is high in sulfur. So different plants bring up different minerals. That's why the diversity is important. See, the plants determine the soil life. Where did that mustard find all that sulfur? I have no idea, but it was really high testing out here. We understand all these things about cover crops. Next one. Keep going down the list. Nitrogen building, nutrient storing, time release based on digestibility, erosion protection, carbon sequestering, building organic matter, all kinds of reasons to grow cover crops. Next one. Oh, that's Penn State. I didn't have to tell my story ahead of time. That's Harry Vetch on the left, and it's the most nitrogen credits ever, and that's clover on the right. They forgot the word digestibility. This is at Penn State. So you can have all the nitrogen credits you want. I said, let your hay get all dead and mature, feed it to a milk cow, and tell me how much milk you get. You won't, it's dry cow feed. So it doesn't, it's got to digest down or it's of no value to your crop. Next one. That's where that green carbon, brown carbon. Oh, Richard Stuckey was in Michigan. He was a retired chemistry professor at Alma College, and he's farmed right in the city limits of Michigan. He's passed away now. I went to his farm one day. I'm writing another book, and I'm doing this whole topic on aha moments in life. Aha, I got it. What? I'm walking at his farm. He said, I want to show you my brown carbon. Boom, it hit me like it hit a brick wall. Because green carbon is bacteria food, brown carbon is fungal food, and black carbon is your reserve food. Now I'll go to the next one, because there's also, we got to look at the fact in here that we've got another one out here. See, bacteria got a 5-to-1 nitrogen to carbon ratio. Where are they getting the nitrogen? Why do you care? From young succulent plants, from the atmosphere. And so they only live 20 minutes. Who eats them? The fungi and the protozoa. And so they're eating a high protein food, and the manure coming out of those organisms, now this is kind of a crazy summary, is high in nitrogen. So having bacteria in your soil is how you get nitrogen and soluble nutrients. Bacteria lives really fast. They only live on easy digestible things. They're not going to eat complex carbons. The fungi and the protozoa do that, and they build your organic matter, but they're really slow, and they eat first, and they rob your crop. And now, of course, the sugar, the liquid carbon is how you build organic matter. Next one. We had that all wrong all these years, I think. So anyway, your jobs are to balance those minerals. Your other job out here is to manage air and water. And the next job is to manage decay of residues. So I looked at, someone said there's 4 reasons you would add a biological to your soil. Number 1, to get more nitrogen. You can grow it. Extract more minerals from your soil. To provide some health protection for your crop. That's why you're adding a biological. I did that. I tried those several biologicals. They don't fit our farm. I don't need them anymore. What's the last reason you need a biological? The decomposition of residues. If you want to really speed something up, spraying on some kind of biology on those residues, it's probably not a dumb idea. Now, I say get it worked in the ground as fast as you can behind the combine where there's still living juice in it. Now, we don't add anything to it. And you can see once it's worked into the ground, if you go to our farm, show up at my farm in the middle of June or the end of June, and you'll pretty well find all the residues have been digested. There's really not much left anymore. Now we've tilled them in and we planted the corn and we cultivated and they're gone. And I got to improve biology in my soil. So those are your jobs. Get good at them. Next one. So to till or not to till, this is the last section, and I got about another 10 minutes, so you just go through them all down here. So you can have healthy soils with tillage. Yes, residue sitting on top of the ground is like putting feed for your cattle on the other side of the fence. All that stuff laying on top of your ground is oxidizing up. It's not feeding your soil life. I say you got to mix, you got to leave some on top of the ground because you have to protect your surface of your soil, but I need a lot of them mixed in because I cannot have a crust on my soil and have it soil breathe properly. And aggressive tillage really upsets the system. Why would you do aggressive tillage? Because you needed to lime it and you put on way too much manure. And so then to aggressively mix that all up every 4 to 5 years is probably not a bad idea, but that's the only reason I see to do aggressive tillage. Otherwise, I can all do shallow. And Brian, I see you're on here. I say potato farming, you probably got to do cleaner tillage than other farmers would do. You got to do what you got to do, but then spend the next year or so building it back up again. Next one. Shallow incorporating residues. Learn how to live with residues on the surface. Get the right kind of equipment to do that. We learn how to live to do it. That means you don't own a time reader because they're a dump rake, and you don't have a cultivator that's got. We had an Einbeck for a while. We called it a soil massager and a plugger upper. It didn't work on our farm. Mr. Einbach was on my farm, and I said to him, "Can I use your cultivator?" He walked out my field. He said, "Absolutely not. You better do more tillage." I said, "Well, you better load that cultivator up and take it out of here, because we're not going to do more tillage. It doesn't fit my farm. We run our buffalo cultivators. You got to have something that gets through all those residues." Next one. So, next one. So tillage is a thoughtful disturbance of the land. Why am I doing it? What am I doing it for? And there's a reason to do it, and a reason not to do it. And you can do anything you want to the top couple inches and then run that big ripper. Next one. This was a canning factory crop of green beans. Isn't it beautiful? Well, they wanted them planted really early, and they only half came up, and then the weeds came up. We never even cultivated them. They finally pulled the plug. And that's our big, we got a big old Lemkin. And yes, there's a lot of residues on the ground. Can you farm that soil? Can you manage that? Now we waited a week, and then we went over with their coon grouse interceptor, but we can farm with a lot of residues on top. We learned to live with that. That's a lot of stuff being put back into that soil, and it'll digest down. That's a little bit mature. That's not bacteria food. Some of it is, but a lot of that's fungal food. There's a lot of green still in it yet, but it's getting more mature than it should be. I wanted to take it down earlier, and of course, I don't know, I forgot what we planted in there next, but that was a canning factory crop. Next one. This is really interesting. This is Joel Goover. A lot of you know who he is down there in Illinois. And that's at his field days. And what do you see? Look at the tire. Look at the wheel on that rotavator. Look at the mud balls flying out. I did field days on my farm for 25 years in a row on the third Tuesday of August. I never got rained out, but one year we had 1,200 people show up, and we didn't have enough feed to feed them all. I can guarantee you that. But it rained the day before, and there was so much water out there. It was like walking on a carpet with sponge, but it didn't rain that day. I took my rotavator. I went out into a cover crop that was knee high. When I was going through the cover crop just to demonstrate rotavators, water was flying out the back. Almost see those big wet clumps? A week later, it was like walking on the thickest, best carpet you've ever seen in your life. You do not destroy soils. When those blades are hitting bare ground is how you destroy soil. As long as there's all kinds of residues, and Joel was running that on all those residues, that does not destroy soils. That does not destroy soils, because those blades are not hitting soil. They're not smearing soil. They're cutting off cover crops. And that's why there was all kinds of roots down below this. That is not a problem. If you got, there's guys today say, "Oh, it's really wet. What do we do?" He said, "I don't know what to do out there." I said, "Just go out there and disc it." As long as you're not on bare ground, you have a hard time destroying soil when you're always in all those cover crops. Next one. And I like to run our ripper. We grazed our cows out here when we had our 300 cows. And how about 3 inches of rain in the middle of the night with 2 inches of rain and 300 cows out here? Oh, we ran our inline rippers. Now the clover grew back over. See, they're 20 inches apart, and they're going down about 12 or 15 inches. We got about a certain amount of topsoil, and we're fracturing through it. Now that's been sitting in the shed for 4 to 5 years, not being used anymore. That's why I put sweet clover in our cover crop. That's another expense we don't need, and we don't want to have to use it. But if we're going to go out there and pack it and cause trouble, I was up in Winnipeg here in November. Oh my gosh, they're usually heavy soils, 50, 60, 70 CECs, and everywhere they drove across the field, they're still trying to combine their crops. Every rut's pumped full of water. What are you going to do about that? I said, you better get the old ripper out here. You made a mess. You got to undo this mess somehow. They didn't want to, but they had to get their crop out, and oh, did it cause trouble out here. Now, we got lighter soils, and we live in those hills. It's not as big a problem, but I'll run that ripper if I need to, but we're trying to avoid that need by having more protection on the soil, that we're not driving on bare ground, and we aren't turning 300 cows out here in a rainstorm. Next one. Mark Anthony, how deep are you running that ripper? We run that ripper about 12 to 13 inches deep on our farm. See, I would go down, when we started out, if the ground is really hard and tight because of tractor size and things. See, I'm the guy that said, if the secret to doing shallow tillage is getting a small tractor and a big rotavator. I can only go 2 inches deep. I couldn't pull it. So that ripper, we're down to about 12, 13 inches, got about 10 inches deep. We got a difference between our topsoil and our subsoil. And right in there, we get a hard pan. And that hard pan is not from plowing. That hard pan is from water percolating through the soil and carrying with it. When you see erosion, is not the gullies through your field. It's the brown snow in the ditches. It's the dirty water running off your fields. Those fine little particles, when they percolate down through the soil, they layer a layer in there, and they blame the plow and the disc for it, but it's really a soil structure problem. And so our soils, over the years, down about 12 inches deep, we have a barrier in there that we wanted to break through it. Now, we've done enough of it. We don't know if we have once And you got to make sure there's enough moisture when you run that ripper. If it's real dry, it doesn't do you any good. When it's a drought, you get a crack in your soil. That does not help your soil. You got to get sidewall compaction. It's got to be a little bit so it smears through there, so it gets a little smeary on the sidewalls, and then the roots have got to get through that channel. Once you get roots down through that channel, you don't need to keep doing it. I'm showing this picture right here of our running a lambkin, but you see, this is how you destroy soil. So why are we doing that? Because we want to seed it to alfalfa. That's a real problem. If you got to get a good seed bed like this, that is now got the capability of really doing damage to my soil. I do not like to till bare ground. Next one. So it's my last one. I did pretty good on time, got an hour and a half. It says, you're supposed to live like you're going to die tomorrow. That's me. I'm old and never know when I'm going to pass on, but I'm going to live like I'm going to die tomorrow, but I'm going to farm like I'm going to live forever. I want to pass that farm on to somebody. Can you imagine if you're a neighboring farmer to our hills here and you're conventional and my son decides to quit? We're terminal farmers. My son never married, so he's got all this land. I tell him he's the richest man I know is my son. He's got a couple thousand acres. That's all bought and paid for. He bought it back in the 90s. So he really worked his little tail off. We had all those cows at one time. But you see, so if you were a conventional farmer, when he's done and rent that land, you've got to, I got a neighbor, we gave up some land and a conventional farm took it over. It probably really offended him. I said, I wanted to watch. I want to know how long it's going to take him to destroy the soils that I built up over 20 years. What do you think? 2 years? 3 years? How much knife in? How did you get a knife in? How aggressive you're going to be? How many chemicals you're going to put out there? How much bare ground you're going to see? So anyway, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I see Brian. It says, he says, can I talk about, I missed your thing. What was Brian asking? You got it on mute.
Yep. Gary, can you talk more about the liquid carbon sugar you mentioned? And are you talking about LCBF or something else? And can you explain what you're doing with it and how you're using it? I want to understand what you're talking about better.
So liquid carbon, look up Alan Philo, used to work for BioEgg, Ken Waco and Jerry Hatfield, they're USDA researchers out of Ames, Iowa, and they wrote the first article, and the second one's coming out. If the government wouldn't have shut down last fall, it'd already be here, and it's about, and Christine Jones from Australia, liquid carbon is photosynthesis. When that plant is photosynthesizing, it's producing sugars, and those sugars are going into the ground to feed our soil life. So why would the plant give up half of the energy it produces and dump it into the soil? Because it needs that symbiotic relationship, and that's the liquid carbon. Now, adding sugars or molasses like QLF does, LCBF and liquid molasses, a couple of gallons per acre. I had a farmer one time, he said, boys, a couple of gallons per acre, too much sugar? Did you see my chart? Our cover crops put 1,000 pounds of sugar back into the ground from our cover crops, and you're worried about 2 gallons of molasses. Now, putting a little molasses down with the seed, putting a little bit of sugar down, a little bit of sugars or molasses is a good idea. It's not a bad idea. It's just the fact that you see, the liquid carbon is photosynthesis. That's why you got to have living roots in the soil, something photosynthesizing every day of the year if you possibly can. The only time we're not photosynthesizing, our rye didn't get very big last fall or the fall before, but now we'll give it an 18 months rest. So when we till our clover crop down in May, and until that corn crop gets up in June, we got about 6 weeks where we got more bare soil without photosynthesis taking place. And that's it. Otherwise, we always got something photosynthesis, and that's your liquid carbon.
I put the link to the study in the chat too for you guys who, I think that's the one that you're talking about.
It's about building resilience and soil function.
The title of it is Soil Energetics.
Yeah.
A unifying framework to quantify soil functionality?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. It's a fun read if you're really into science. They got another paper coming out. There's supposed to be 3 of them all together. Okay. And Alan is one of those young genius kids that used to work for me. He's my monk friend. He was a monk, and once a monk, always a monk. And so he's different, but he's really smart. And so he's working with those guys on this liquid carbon thing.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you much.
Does anybody, before we send Gary, by the way, Gary, my goodness, like you are such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for your energy. I am shocked that you've been speaking all day. How many hours were you speaking today?
I put a 6-hour day in. I did a 6-hour meeting today with these Mennonite and Amish farmers down in Buffalo, Missouri today. And now this. But I'm pretty well done for the day.
Are you a caffeine drinker? Is
Not
this?
much. If I drink caffeine, I can't sleep. I'm not a big sleeper. Sleeping is overrated. And so as I got older, I can only have one cup of coffee in the morning. I'm not a
Oh
big
my
caffeine guy.
goodness, Gary.
I just,
Well,
I think energy is something free and comes with it. And I've watched my diet. I'm a low carbohydrate, higher protein kind of thing. I'm really careful what goes in this body. When you get older, I gotta take care of myself so I live long enough so I get to enjoy all the work I did. So I can see
mm,
some of you young people and what you're accomplishing. And so the ball is not in my court anymore; it's passing on.
wow. Well, if anybody has any questions that they weren't able to get answered, please feel free to ask now. We can hang out for a couple minutes if that's okay, Gary.
Yeah.
Hey, Katie, this is Mark Anthony or Gary. I don't know who can answer this best, but I'm in Southeast Illinois by St. Louis on the Illinois side. And I'm not sure where to go for like cover crops or, who's a good vendor or where can I get, peas, sweet peas or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I dealt with Byron Seeds. That we get a lot of stuff through Byron Seeds, and I get a lot of stuff from Albert Lee Seed House, and there's Welthers in Iowa. There's a lot of companies out here that got a mixture of cover crop kind of things. There's probably more down there, some of that I don't know in southern Illinois. But yeah, like I said, and to me, that's your fertilizer, and that's we don't mind spending. We spend our rye, we save our own seed, but we spend $50 an acre on that clover seed out here. But that's our farm. Yeah.
Hmm. Got it. Yep.
Yeah, I would second Alberta Lee, but I will also get some additional information for you, and I can send you an email, Mark, with some more
That'd be super.
specifics for some dealers in your area. Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
wonderful. Well, Gary, you're just phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time and your
My pleasure.
insight and your knowledge and just being so willing to share it and the breadth of it. It's pretty incredible. We do have another webinar this Thursday if you guys are interested. This one is funded by TOP, so there is no charge to attend. It is a panel of 3 feed grade, I have to be really careful when I say this, feed grade organic growers here in Illinois that grow in all different scales and sizes. Some integrate livestock, some are brand spanking new and just transition to organic. So if you're interested in that, I'll send the link out for you guys to register if you would like to. Also, this is recorded, and I'll be if you didn't catch everything that Gary said, I will send out the recording here in the next few days, so you guys have a copy of that too.
All
So,
right. Michelle, well,
yes.
Hey, Gary, one more question. Are you going to have a field day this year or do you have an annual field day still?
no, I actually the farm I was having the field days on. I sold that to my wife's nephew. I set it up so he could make a living. I got the packing shed, greenhouses, a pick your own. He got a barn as an event center. How does the next generation get into farming? They're not going to make it growing corn and beans. I guarantee you that. So I don't have that farm anymore. And my son really. So I've done it. I figured long enough, and so I'm not doing field days anymore. But I gladly attend anybody's field days I can and get out here. So
Okay.
you're welcome to
Thank
stop
you.
at the farm if you're in the Spring Green area. Just contact me. I'm willing to show you the farm. I'm not having field days anymore.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.